I see. And it sounds like for you, one of the reasons you chose family medicine is because it is pretty broad. You can, it doesn't kind of confine you into one specific thing that you do. And that reminded me, I remember I heard you speak one time. I can't remember where it was. I might have been at one of the big Prime conferences. And the thing that stuck with me, and I always think about it, was that you said, I came into medical school realizing that the field of medicine is too narrow. And so that's why Prime LC was helpful, because I was able to get a master's degree and expand the way I think about medicine and populations and things like that. And I remember that's something that I won't forget, because I totally get it now, having done I'm doing the MBA currently. Mm-hmm. And you did a master's of public health, is that correct?
I did the Long Beach MPH.
Okay. And so what did you get from that kind of added to your clinical career and in medicine in general?
Well, I'll give you two answers there. One, I got the letters, and and to be quite frank about it, like, the letters count, and I'm really proud of the letters now, because I think it speaks to that issue of an MD is not sufficient in today's kind of chaos of our healthcare system, and maybe, larger social struggles, writ large. So whenever I sign my name on any document now, whenever, they say, oh, I'll put your initials here, like, I'm not just two initials. I always do MD, MPH, and like every one of my staff know it now, and they don't even know what MPH is. Like, literally a few months ago, I had my whole team of MAs, like, as you could tell, like, finally one of them had decided, okay, finally asked. We were about to start a meeting, and they're like, Dr. Duncan, so what is MPH? Because they're like, we know you sign now with 5 letters. And, like, it's not like I want to say, oh, I'm a 5-letter person. It's more that statement of it's more than being just a doctor. So it was like this, like, very touching moment there with my MAs. Like, oh. And then they're like, well, what's public health? And then they're like, what's that mean? Like, it was this very powerful moment. So that's one answer. Gave me the letters, and I think that speaks to, like, yes, we need a bigger picture than just the MD picture to help solve our crisis. Second piece, honestly, is it gave me the freedom to do other things that I was interested in. Mm-hmm. One, it's a year of break of different than medicine studying and round studying. You get to study other things, and probably most of us in Prime are broader based folks than just the medicine box we've had to put ourselves in for a while.
Definitely.
And in my case, particularly, like, selfishly, I worked an extra year in there. So my MPH took me 2 years, but I was able to spend a year doing what we called a health policy fellowship. But I was literally running around doing teaching and educating about single payer stuff for that group called the Physicians for a National Health Program, or was then called the California Physicians Alliance. So it was the vehicle by which I had the academic freedom to keep pursuing that particular interest itself.
I see. And I feel like in some ways it also ties into the creation of Lobby Day. I was hoping maybe you could talk about how that happened. Where did you get this idea for this sort of thing, and how did you make it happen?
Oh, well, yes. It does actually tie very directly in. So Lobby Day was not my idea. Okay. But I was one of the original 6 medical students who made it happen. But literally, it was quite honestly the idea of kind of my partner in crime at the time, who was a medical student at UCSF. But I started looking around for, like, what's going on here on this campus and what other things. And somehow I heard about this, AMSA group, which did not exist on campus. And for me, I started, that was the time AMSA was really into pharma free, and they were also into this idea of universal health care, single payer stuff.
And that's the American Medical Student Association.
Correct.
Okay.
And I just became very drawn to the healthcare reform, single payer discussion stuff. So much so that I decided to form a chapter of AMSA on campus. And because there was no chapter, there was nothing else going on. Of course, I became the president of it because there was nobody else. And so I would go to the president's meeting, and basically I met the state network of other students, mostly from UCSF and UC Davis, were students, and literally with a group of 6 of us at a regional AMSA conference in my first year. At the end of my first year of med school, there was this bill for a single payer that at the time was called SB 840, that then became SB 810. In trying to decide, like, how could we as med students support this, somebody said, oh my gosh, we should make a lobby day. And that the person who said that was, she was the president of the UCSF chapter. So at the end of my first year of med school, we said, oh my gosh, could we all come together, all meaning we all, like med students from the UCs of California, arrive in Sacramento at the same time and have a lobby day of us standing there in our little white coats and say, we support healthcare reform, this model of healthcare reform. So that's what we did. Now, that in itself wasn't revolutionary. Of course, there's plenty of lobby days. People do them all the time. But at the time, we didn't know it. And in itself, AMSA, in other states and in other activities had already organized lobby days. So we kind of said, well, can we just follow this model? So January of my second year of med school, we did the first lobby day, and not having any idea what we were doing, nor if it would really ever work out. But we did it, and we had 6 or 7 schools there, and there were 125 students. And then it continued kind of each year growing. And in 2008, it was, in a way, one of the biggest and strongest, because that was kind of the year that the single-payer bill had the most potential. And then by 2010, there was actually no more real single-payer bill, and it's kind of changed focus since then. But interestingly now, and I would say in a way more salient to Prime or potential input from Prime, is that, as you might know, for this year, well, really for last year and now for this year, the Student Lobby Day, which has now become this CAPSA group, has joined forces, if you will, and it's not about single payer right now. That's off the table, or not on the table, however you want to look at it. Since last year and for this year, is now about the issue of health insurance for the undocumented. And that, to me, is this golden opportunity to really leverage, Prime, to directly connect Prime activity, Prime activism with, the bigger picture healthcare reform. Because the sticking point of how openly or how much we discriminate against the undocumented in the state or this country is so huge that if we level that and change that paradigm here in California, many people say, well, then that's the biggest barrier for a future of truly universal healthcare, is the sticking point of well, what about them damn undocumented, who are using up all our services? So that's a short history of our lobby day. It started in 2006, and now 2016, 10 years later, it's involved in what could be kind of the next biggest healthcare movement fight, which is, are we going to cover the undocumented, allow them legally to have health insurance in this state?
I'll tell you what, Parker, it's inspiring to hear you say it, and for me, it's a great call to action, and I think hearing that is what is exciting. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, when for example, a first or second year medical student, Prime student, anybody is trying to figure out why they're doing this, because you're learning about biochemistry or something that maybe doesn't seem to relate. What can you think about? What can you look to keep you inspired? And I think that this is very pertinent, especially this year and right now. And I'm glad you put it so elegantly. And I hope that people listen and understand that this is important. So thank you. I guess I wanted to ask you now just a few rapid fire questions. They don't have to be rapid fire answers. Just that's kind of, it's just something that I heard someone else in a podcast do, Tim Ferriss, and so I'm trying to see if it moves things along for me. I guess one of the questions is, when you think of the word successful, or you think of a person who's successful, who is someone that comes to your mind?
Oh man, I don't know if I'm going to be the best for these rapid fire answers.
No, the answers don't have to be quick. It's just the way I phrase them.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw an example out for you.
Please.
So the current leader of our single-payer movement in California, so of the California chapter of the Physicians for a National Health Program, or the California Physicians Alliance, kind of goes by both those names. He himself, he's a emergency physician, trained probably 20-something years ago, and was becoming an emergency physician, well, more than 20 years ago now. So he was becoming an emergency physician right as the AIDS epidemic was blowing up in America, hitting America, so 30 years ago. And his kind of social activism was really formed in that of being a gay man himself, and then watching, AIDS blow up, and especially like as an ED doc. This man, in a way, actually, I haven't thought about this before, David, so I'm going to make this parallel. He, in a way, has done a bit of a similar to the Almanetta, but he didn't have to sacrifice kind of politically. He spent 15 years out in the trenches in a huge emergency room, I think mostly like in Miami, like Miami-Dade or something, like some gigantic place. And he eventually said, I got to do more. There's a better way that I can contribute my skills and talents. And although he said he loved, direct care, emergency medicine, he gave that up, tried for a while to do both, and got into AIDS activism, and then was hired and became like an executive director of a, AIDS advocacy group on the East Coast, and I forget the details. And then has come to the single-payer world, because he considers that kind of the next, big main fight in terms of healthcare justice. So while you can tell, so he's a physician, you can tell he's just always a physician, able to still, bring that physician mind and kind of thinking to essentially now leading a pretty big organization that's still shoestring. And, if we had $5 million, we could do a whole lot more. But in terms of this guy has such a combined and, to me, amazing skill set. He's this, medical brain thinker. And everything he's saying, you can always say, oh, I can tell his medical training there. And yet somehow, after residency, he's been able to amass this skill set of, yes, he got an MPH along the way, but he knows how to run an organization, how to think globally, how to bring organizations together, and how to broker politics in order to really push a movement forward. And he's actually the one that has brought the single payer group, and this is depending on what people and about single payer, one of its criticisms, it's been criticized for being so kind of isolationist, kind of like the single payer bust. We got to have this now, without being the more incremental or being more embracing of other activities. And he's been the one to lead the charge, essentially, to shift single payer to say, yes, we got our eye on the prize. We must have everyone in America deserves health care in a publicly funded way. It doesn't discriminate against anyone now. And we'd all love to snap our fingers and have it happen overnight. But how are we going to build alliances to really start marching there? And he's the one who got us, in particular, really behind the SB10, or the undocumented struggle, realizing that, oh my gosh, without that, you are never going to have single payer. So what are we doing just dreaming and marching kind of for a cause that doesn't have any meat right now? Let's work with groups that really have the same mind and spirit like Prime does.
That's such an interesting way to think of it. It's kind of like Occam's razor. You take a very complex problem and take a thin slice of it, because parsimony or simplicity is the key to unlocking the complex bigger problem and finding a solution. And I think that's a good way to do it, and we don't often think about that. We just get overwhelmed by how big things are, and it kind of makes us just feel stuck in the mud, like we can't do anything. Another thing that reminded me of when you're talking about him is in our Chicano Latino Studies classes, where we read Paul Farmer's Pathologies of Power with Dr. Campos, and she showed us this reading because I think the main thrust of it is that Dr. Farmer says that social justice issues and medicine are so intertwined that as physicians, we have the power to bring these social issues to light. And he references the HIV/AIDS epidemic helping bring social justice to, for homosexuality into the forefront, and multi-drug resistant TB for the terrible prison environments and things like that. And so it almost sounds like this idea of focusing on healthcare for the undocumented patients or undocumented people in America is a way to bring this idea of isn't everybody equal to light.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully put, yeah. And this is, in a way, the next big group that we have so systemically colluded to discriminate against.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And so just to change gears a little bit, do you have any suggestions for maybe books that you've read, documentaries that you've seen, journal articles that you've read that you would suggest for people like me, either medical students or people interested in medicine or the idea of primal C, that they could read and learn about these issues and things that you care about?
Well, my suggestions around that are, I would say, slanted one towards primal C and then second towards kind of healthcare reform or single payer stuff. So I'm still assuming that, yes, you kind of confirm that everyone's reading Paul Farmer. That seems kind of like entering argument number one.
Of course.
And then related more to, and I assume everybody knows about Atul Gawande. I take him with a little bit of a grain of salt, but he's probably the most brilliant healthcare writer alive today. The fellow who wrote the Bitter Pill. Okay. People have heard of that. Also had a time series about that, which I think gives a real good window into kind of what's healthcare today. And then still one of my, well, then I'll share one of my more kind of, I think, social and romantic sides is any Paulo Coelho book that you can read in your off time.
Of course.
I'm sure I haven't read all of them, but maybe like a third I've read. I don't know. That's a list off.
I mean, he's written, he writes a book every 2 years, so he's a pretty impressive guy. Which one are you talking about?
I don't know if I would try and name a favorite.
Sure. The most famous one is he wrote The Alchemist, right?
Yes, and that was probably the first one that I read, in a way. And it was actually that was the first book that I ever read in Spanish. So I had read it while I was kind of becoming interested in like Latin American issues in general. And then later it was somebody gave it to me and a friend of mine who like kind of supported my own personal cause and transformation gave me the copy in Spanish and said, read this. And I was like, I've read it before. She's like, but not in Spanish. and it was like the first time I had read a book in Spanish. So that one stays with me very emotionally because I'm like, oh my gosh, of course I can converse in Spanish, but I had never read a book. And I got through the whole thing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So that has an emotional connection to me as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Another question. So this is something from a book I read called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. And he was one of the first investors in Facebook, a very big thinker. And it's kind of a tough question, but I figured just throw it out there. He says... You're
going to be great, by the way, when you're doing residency interviews. Like when you're at your residency interviewing other surgeon candidates.
Oh, thanks, Parker. I appreciate it. Well, the question he asks is, what is something that you believe to be true that other people think is insane?
Huh. Well, maybe I'm not a big enough thinker then, because
that's not true.
I am. All right, I'm going to scale the question down, but it'll scale back up because I think it's relevant. I think it's relevant to Prime. I think it's to what speaks again to the mission of really what Prime is trying to change or create. This notion of who are the people, or who we become as people, as physicians, and how do we walk in this world. And a whole piece that I've begun to appreciate, that I think was kind of there in maybe some of the lectures from Almanetta, or maybe some of the teachings, but wasn't as formal, is that notion of power and privilege. And I'm talking about what we see on the wards, that kind of traditional abuse of the hierarchy, the attending who yells or the surgeon who throws the scalpel across the room. And so here I am in a Northern California, kind of hippie anyway, and then family medicine residency, everybody's soft and lovey. And yet I'm still witnessing it there, right? And then I become, I'm a lead clinician, whatever, but first I was just hired as a staff physician at a community clinic, and at that our, most underserved community clinic, 80% Latino. And here and there, as I walk in, one of my most poignant lessons was appreciating kind of the abuse of power that I was walking into from the folks who had left. Like a couple of people had left. I'm new out of residency. They're hiring myself and one of my very good friends out of residency. Like, we're part of kind of the new blood. Even in there, like the most underserved, you think like, my gosh, we've got so much to do here. We got such a clear and palpable mission. And what I had witnessed was that even in there was such an abuse, mostly from like clinicians, not just doctors, nurses, NPs, towards the staff. This pretty raw, ripe, like, I'm the physician, I'm going to yell at you just because I'm, frustrated with the rest of the world and I'm not getting through my clinic. So I'm going to crap on you because I can. And in one of my first meetings with this whole staff, I said, my rule is, if you ever see me walk out of a room and I'm not smiling, or if I come out of a room grumpy-faced, then please, any of you have the right and the power to call me on it. There is no reason why I, as a physician, a person in here in this clinic of privilege, I'm the highest paid person here because I'm a physician. Not more than the medical director, but I'm making more than any other person there. There's no reason why I get to burden the rest of you with whatever I'm upset about. And that literally was this unbelievable notion for this group of staff people there. One woman at that meeting in front of me, an MA who'd been there for years already and well respected, but clearly had been disrespected before, cried in front of my face and the other people there. So I don't know if that was exactly your question, but that's what popped in my mind of that is the level, that's the level of detail to which I believe that probably Almanetta was really thinking about, of what we need to transform in our systems, and some people call it microsystems of care, if we ever really want to have what I would still say, a single payer or a universal healthcare system. If we can't even get right how to walk out of a room and not yell at the person, who makes less than we do, then how are we ever going to really be the leaders to transform a healthcare system?
I think that is the perfect answer. and it speaks a lot to something that I personally struggle with as well. And I know people in the Prime program, that have the privilege of being in medical school and being in graduate school and becoming physicians, that, there is that privilege that we have, and we need to recognize it as such. And all those little, micro interactions we have with people make such a difference. And so, that's a perfect story.
I'll give a confession, a caveat, right? I fully believe that. And I will say one of my most recent struggles in my clinic is I found out that I had violated my own principle the other day without knowing it, and nobody called me on it. And then somebody was upset, didn't tell me about it, and it wound its way around. And finally, out of this roundabout way, I heard about it, and I was then so upset. I'm no, let me know. And they said, well, wasn't this time you did whatever? I'm oh my gosh, I know. I was so upset about something, and I had almost no memory of completely disrespecting this person, which I clearly did. So it's one thing to try and set your bar. It's definitely another to try and live up to it. So
No, absolutely. But you have to set it somewhere, and it's worth setting it higher. And then you build it upon, these ideas of virtue and graciousness and reflection. And I think if you don't reflect and don't realize that these things happen, you can't catch them, and ultimately they won't change. And so it's nice that you were able to see that eventually and make it right. And I think that's so hard for so many people to do, myself included. So
I ain't good at it yet. I'm working on it.
We'll get there, hopefully. Okay, and I guess I had a question just for people who are maybe interested in applying to the Prime LC program and applying to medical school in general. I know that your path wasn't as direct, but other people will be doing post-bacs and trying to get into medical school the non-traditional way, and they feel that Prime LC might be for them. What would you tell your undergraduate self or your pre-medical school self in terms of advice for getting to that next step? Any suggestions?
Relative
or
to
something?
Prime or just in general?
In general, even. That would be helpful.
I'm almost thinking of this like if I had to do it over again type of thing. This is going to sound maybe corny. I don't want to say just in the sense of believe in yourself, but so when I just finally decided to go to med school, it was like, as you mentioned or we've discussed, a fairly non-traditional path. It was kind of out of the blue. And I thought I was going to be the psychiatrist because I was thinking about going to PhD school. I'm like, I don't want to do a thesis. But anyway, something said, no, I really want to think like a psychiatrist, which is nuts. But so I had no idea if I could ever qualify. I was 30 years old. I had gone to undergrad as a poli-sci major, was a solidly like 3.1 GPA. If I had just applied then, no way ever would I have gotten into med school. So required going back to school and doing all the stuff and getting a post-bac. And I had really good mentors along the way, but I still went along with this notion of like, I'm not sure I really believe anyone here. Like, I'm going for it. But I really have no idea if this is going to work out. But I went in, I said, okay, I really have no idea, but I'm just going for it. And once I decided to go for it, there was like nothing that was going to stop me. In the sense of, like I said, I'm going to put everything I have into this, and if it works out, great. And if not, I'll just go back to the job I was doing before. And there was a very nice freedom in that, which personally I had not ever experienced that before. I went to high school and didn't pay attention, and I got into college, kind of without paying attention, didn't work too hard in college personally. I wasn't somebody who from, 6th grade on was like, I'm going to study every night because I'm going to be a doctor at 25. But no, so maybe this is obvious to folks, but it was until that point in my life where I was like, I don't care what happens. I don't have any true faith that this will actually happen. I have no reason to actually believe that this will work out. On the other hand, I didn't have a reason it wouldn't, but I had no model by which, oh yeah, you can be 30 years old, have a very mediocre college career, and then somehow find your way to medical school when you had no background in it before. So I don't think that's the best answer, but that's what I'm thinking of. Something in there.
No, I totally get it. It's you have a path that may not be direct. It might go around and about, but ultimately, if you believe that it's something you want to do, you can't just look back on your past credentials and say, I'm not good enough. I don't have what it takes. Really, you have to buckle down and focus on what you can do to change and move forward. And I think in some ways that's kind of what you're describing. Correct me,
David. That's an excellent synthesis of what I was trying to get at. You could be a PR person as well in your back time. One of the things that I say, I am so grateful and thankful for Prime. It's been this fabulous creation and experience, and I hope it becomes much more, thanks to things like what you're doing. I would also say, as I told you, since when I was applying to med school, there wasn't Prime. And somebody asked me before, would you do it again, or what would you say? And I think somebody asked me once, if there weren't Prime, what would you have done? Well, it wouldn't have been exactly the same. I know that. But what I would want to say is I would have wanted to essentially do prime on my own. Although inherently, I think that's impossible because the potential and the beauty of prime is that we're doing this together. But I would have wanted to pursue or continue through medicine kind of against the grain and with the prime mentality. Because there's enough of us there that have that. And that to me is the beauty of prime. It's a nidus. It's an organizing place around bringing that consciousness together.
That's 100% true. Well, I want to thank you for the time. I guess the last thing is just if people, I know how busy you are, and I know you have a lot going on, balancing obviously family and work and the mission and everything. But if somebody wanted to get in touch with you and just ask you some more questions, maybe get some advice, where could they find you?
Oh, first of all, absolutely, yes, because what I believe part of our kind of commitment is to do this. And yes, we're all busy. We're always going to be busy, but we always need to find a way to do this. And second of all, like in terms of the plug, I will offer to anyone who wants to, call or chat or email or talk, yes. Anyone who wants to think about coming up here to work with us, I would say our larger community, can be done through our residency. Where I am at the clinic across town, there is not an official site, but it is my goal and intention to make it one. So I would say anybody who wants to come work with me, like if you want to work in a prime type of place, you got to come over to my clinic. But that's not where the residency is right now. It's not like an official spot. But it's my goal, along with actually a couple other prime students who are here, to make that like an official pathway eventually. So I'd say yes to anyone who wants to email, text, or call, but then also that kind of offer of a clinical rotation that, in a way, having the demand or having the request would facilitate my being able to go back to the residency director and say, I need these med students, you need to approve this rotation and make it happen.
I like that. And I hope that does happen. I think that anybody would be very privileged to work with you. I'm jealous that I don't get the chance, but it's really nice. So thank you very much for all the time that you've given me.
Thank you, David, for this idea and for making it happen. This is great.
Yeah, and I just hope that people have a chance to take a listen, and when things get difficult and you don't know why you're doing this, and you could just listen to what we've talked about today, and that can hopefully inspire that reason that we all have within us and why we want to keep going and keep pushing forward. So, and
if you don't get too many likes on the podcast there, perhaps we can post it on the Bernie website.
Yes, absolutely. I'm all about it. Well, thank you so much, Parker. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, David, have a good afternoon. Thank you again. And yes, please, whatever I can do in relation to this, or if you want another candidate, I can help recruit one for you whenever you're next ready.
Sounds good. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your weekend.
Okay. You as well.
Thanks, Parker.
Bye.
Bye.